We hear that it is common for dyslexics to reverse their letters. Is that true?
We hear that a lot, right? We hear that's what dyslexia is.
We also hear that it affects more boys than it does girls. Is that
Right.
true?
Hello, I'm Dr. Laura Cassidy. I am the founder and board chair of the Dyslexia Resource Center. And I'm thrilled to be here with you today. And we're going to talk a little bit about how the DRC came into existence and why we're so passionate about it and what the DRC does. And with me today is Rhonda Smith, and she is the Dyslexia Education Director.
So, Laura, just tell us, what is the story behind the Dyslexia Resource Center and how did it get started?
So, over a decade ago, a friend who actually works for the Dyslexia Resource Center now and myself, we both had young kids, and they both of our children, of these two children, have dyslexia. And we were quite honestly baffled because we knew they weren't getting what they wanted or what they needed, most importantly, what they needed. And we were spending a lot of money. And so what happened is we had the incredible opportunity to meet with Dr. Sally and Bennett Shaywitz at an event in Washington, D.C. And after we went to that event, and for me, it was connecting her book, Overcoming Dyslexia, and that was at the time, it was the first edition, with what I was seeing with my daughter in the classroom. And I wasn't quite sure how to put the two together, and they helped us with that. So when we came back, we talked to the school where the kids were, and we were like, we had all these great ideas. We know what the science is. This is what we recommend. They were not interested. So the thought was that we should have a training center. But the problem with the training center at that point was there was nobody had any idea of what you were training for. So it was a great thought to have a training center, but what are you going to do once you train the teachers? And so I talked to people in education, and they're like, you have to have a school. And I'm like, oh, really? And I thought, oh, okay, we'll do that, which was much more difficult than I expected. But anyway, the school opened in 2013. And then we had to have someone that could train the teachers. We knew we wanted to start the training arm, the teacher training arm of the entity, which would become the Dyslexia Resource Center. But we had to have someone who was qualified to be a trainer. That took a couple of years. So the school was actually in existence for like 4 or 5 years before the Dyslexia Resource Center opened. But the goal of both entities is to identify those children that have dyslexia and make sure that they get educated in the proper evidence-based fashion.
Laura, so what is dyslexia?
It's a great question. So there are a lot of definitions floating out there. The definition that we used is in federal law, and it's also in Louisiana state law, but it is an up-to-date definition. And what it says is that dyslexia is an unexpected difficulty in reading for an individual who has the intelligence to be a much better reader. This is primarily due to a problem or deficit in phonological processing, which affects this person's ability to read, write, and spell. Now, that's a long definition, so I think we should break it down. The unexpected difficulty in reading. So we know that in a non-dyslexic, a conventional reader, IQ and reading track with each other. So the higher your IQ, the better you're going to read. Average IQ, you're going to be an average reader. For dyslexics, those two do not track. So your IQ can be very high and your reading will not be commensurate with that IQ. Dyslexia has nothing to do with the intelligence. So it's unexpected because we usually expect people's reading to, again, match that IQ. And then it says it's due to a phonological processing in the vast majority of cases. And we'll talk about that later, but basically it's matching the spoken word with the written word. There's a little more to it, but that's the basic concept. And if you think about it, that would affect your ability to read, your ability to write, to speak, um, and also to spell. And traditionally, I tell people dyslexics are terrible spellers. That's one of the things, the easy thing to see. Um, Again, they don't all look alike, but that's basically the definition that we adhere to that's based in 21st century science.
Well, you talked about the phonological deficit that all our dyslexic children experience, and you talked about the spelling. So I think that was a good explanation and a good understanding of what dyslexia is.
Okay, so just so though, let me just say, just so people understand, it doesn't look the same in every child because your IQs are going to be different. The severity of dyslexia could be mild, just like in any entity that we see in medicine. It can be moderate or it could be quite severe. It is lifelong. It doesn't go away. You don't need to get retested to see if you have dyslexia. Once you have it, you definitely do. So again, the manifestations in your life or your child's life may look different from your neighbor or friend's child with dyslexia, but some of the key clues could be, again, that difficulty with reading. You listen to them reading out loud. They have frequent pauses. They have a hard time, especially with longer words, sort of deciphering or pulling apart the sounds. They may have just a difficult time with writing, the spelling we covered. And the other thing, though, I did want to talk about was anxiety is common. You can imagine if you're a slow reader, but you're a fast thinker, and then you're in a situation that you have to perform. Say you're asked a question. You may not say the words that you intend to say. They're thinking what they want to say. They're trying to pull that up, but it's often, especially if they're very nervous, can come out as a different word or series of words than what they intended. So we're trying to take a lot of complicated things here in a short period of time, but at least we're giving you the introduction.
So, Laura, how does dyslexia affect their self esteem?
Well, you can imagine, since we know that the academic achievement gap is present in the first grade, and the acquisition of reading skills, language, and then reading skills happens before the first grade, right? So they're behind, and they're smart. Their IQ's average to above. And they're looking at their classmates and they're like, why am I having such a hard time learning simple words like cat or bat or set? You think of those early readers that the children have, or even remembering the alphabet before that. So that's why we really encourage early identification at the end of kindergarten or the beginning of first grade so that the child knows, okay, I know why I'm struggling. It has nothing to do with my intelligence. I'm dyslexic, and hopefully they can be proud of it, and then start advocating for themselves.
Well, also, we hear that it is common for dyslexics to reverse their letters. Is that true?
We hear that a lot, right? We hear that's what dyslexia is. So dyslexics can reverse their letters, but so can non-dyslexics, and so that would be myth number one so far today.
We also hear that it affects more boys than it does girls. Is that
Right.
true?
Not another myth. Um, it turns out probably, I mean, I would guess that girls tend to not act up as much or act out in class if they're struggling, you know, schools made for girls, right? So they, I think, learn to adapt better than boys. But we know by studies now that it's actually happens with close to equal frequency prevalence in both boys and girls.
So, Laura, tell us a little bit more about the neurological condition.
My favorite part. So just try to make this simple, but we think of the brain as it's like a black box, right? It's hard to understand because even when you see it, it's not like it's a muscle or a bone or or eyes. So when we look at the brain and we looked at functional MRIs, it was looked at across America, across the world. And that's important because all of the studies validated the same thing. And what they would do is they would take a student with dyslexia and they would have them read text, and then they'd have student without dyslexia and read. And the functional MRI looks at basically brain flow, which tells you what area of the brain is lighting up, which area of the brain you're using. And so for what we would call typical readers, not dyslexic readers, they read from the left side of the brain. Now, when you're first learning to read, you're reading sort of from the left middle part of the brain. And then as you get into fourth, fifth, and older, you're really, and as adult, you're using the left posterior part of the brain. And it's a very efficient. And if you're not dyslexic, you think about it, right? Once you learn to read, you're just zipping through, and it's really quite an amazing feat. Without thought, you understand what those lines on the paper, the oral language they represent. So it's a very efficient system, works quickly, and 80% of the population uses that system. On the other hand, the dyslexics, what you see is they're reading from the right side of the brain. Now, again, they may read a little bit from the left, but the majority of it is they're using the right side of the brain. And not only are they using the right side of the brain to read, they're reading from more anteriorly. So you have this left posterior for non-dyslexics, and the dyslexic is using what we call an inefficient system. That's why they have to work hard to read. They're slower readers. Again, nothing to do with intelligence, but they're reading from a different part of the brain. And this is really important to understand. Again, it has nothing to do with their IQ, just where they're reading from. And there are more studies that are looking at other things as well, the connectivity, et cetera. But the big picture is dyslexics are reading from a different area that's not as efficient. And they're going to read from that system, again, for their whole life.
Dr. Cassidy, we often say that we are taking the mystery out of dyslexia. What does that mean?
So I don't know about you, Rhonda, but it seems to me that a lot of people, like we talked earlier, think that dyslexia is reversing letters, right?
Yes.
And it goes back to the brain as a black box. And so I remember when, my child was young, very young, and somebody mentioned the word dyslexia. And the tone that they used was a negative, sort of foreboding voice. I'm like, oh, I and I didn't know what dyslexia was at the time, but I knew that the person was trying to tell me it's not a positive thing. And so part of our job is to help people understand what it is. But what's equally as important, I think, is to talk about their strengths, because that's really where I think a lot of the mystery is. These are such bright kids, and yet they're not doing well in school. And part of it is they're not identified, and part of it is people don't understand dyslexia. So if we can do anything, hopefully we can help you understand. They're incredibly creative. They have great problem solving skills. They are not good at rote memory. So if you give them a test that has 50 or 100 multiple choice answers, they're probably going to fail. If you introduce them to language that's 3 and 4 syllables long and they've never seen that language and they don't know that language, and the teacher's talking like this, and make sure you write all this out and the test is tomorrow, they're not going to do well. Look at Richard Branson, right? He develops an airline. He's looking at big picture. Here's this problem, and he comes up with an incredible solution. And we could talk about others because there are many famous dyslexics. But who we're trying to help is all the kids in the classrooms that don't know about these famous, and they're feeling self-defeated. So again, it doesn't look the same in everybody, but if you can understand what we call the sea of strengths, which is from the Shaywitzes, that they have this one area, phonological processing issue, which affects a lot of school. That's for sure. Reading, writing. But then they have this whole other part of their brain, which is really important for after going through school, having a job, contributing to society, that they can think creatively, they can figure out problems. They are crucial for our society because they have skill sets that a lot of people don't. So I don't know. Do you have anything to add about demystifying, or does that help?
Oh, well, that helps, in helping parents and educators in the community, just raising the awareness of dyslexia. How can we go about raising the awareness, helping our parents to understand that this is not a negative thing that our children, if they are dyslexic?
Yeah, I think talking about it and trying to normalize it as much as possible helps take that mystery out.
And so the mission of the Dyslexia Resource Center, let's just clarify that, is to?
It is to identify those that are dyslexic and then to get them educated. Dyslexia Resource Center identifies kids with dyslexia by testing them. That's important. But you have to be tested to know for sure you're dyslexic. And we offer that service. That's important because you can't get what you need if you're not identified as dyslexic. And then you have to be educated. And that's why we train teachers. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So if you don't have a trained teachers, and we don't mean a weekend training or a 2-week course, we're talking about teachers that really have an in-depth understanding about what dyslexia is, and then how to give them it through a curriculum, how to build, because it is a stepwise process, that acquisition of reading skills. So that is the mission, identification and then the education of those children. Rhonda, you have a lot of interaction with parents and with students. So if they're concerned that their student or child is dyslexic, or they know that they're dyslexic, what are the steps that they should do? What steps should they take?
Well, the first step is don't delay in getting your child tested. If you think that your child is dyslexic, you need to schedule that testing to get that diagnosis, because the sooner you can get the diagnosis, the quicker your child can start getting the intervention and the help that they need.
So when you say that, are you saying don't wait a year? Don't wait, what if it's like, oh, it's January. I'm going to wait till the summer. It's going to be easier for me. What about that?
Yes, it would be easier for you, but let's also look, your child is already struggling in school. And the longer that you wait, the further behind they're going to get, the more frustrated they're going to get with school. And so as soon as you suspect that your child may be dyslexic, you need to find and get a test scheduled so that you get that diagnosis. The longer you wait, the further behind your child is going to get. So we know that even at the age of 6, early as first grade, that we can diagnose your child with dyslexia so they can start getting that early intervention or that early help that they need.
Yes, because we know that gap is there in the first grade and it doesn't go away, but if it's not addressed, it'll increase. Okay. Now, what if the child is, say, 12 years old So they're way past first grade. What would you tell the parents?
If your child is 12 years of age, fifth, sixth, seventh grade, and we know that is way beyond first grade, I would still recommend that you get your child a diagnosis of dyslexia so that they can get the accommodations or the extra help and intervention even that they need at that stage of the game of school.
And even if you're an adult, we have adults come to the Dyslexia Resource Center, right?
Yes, we've had adults come in, I mean, as old as 35, 40 years old. They have struggled all their life and they thought they were dyslexics and they've come in and they tested. And it's just been a relief for them to know that, hey, I know what's wrong with me now and what's going on and why I struggle reading.
Yeah, I think we have stories of grown people, grown adults
Mm-hmm.
who come in and get tested, and then they're told that they're smart, that they're not dumb. And they've always, even though it might be just a little bit, but I think in the back of their mind, they've always wondered, well, maybe I'm just not smart.
Mm-hmm.
And then they learn about dyslexia, that they are dyslexic. And these grown, and it's been more, we've seen more men, although it could be men and women, they cry. I mean, that's just a testimony, I think, to how empowering it is to know why you've struggled.
All those years, yes.
Yes. Can you think of other stories that you can about that have been identified after testing and that, has made an impact, changes you've seen?
Well, one comes to mind of she was a senior in high school, getting ready to go into college, and she was struggling passing the college board, that ACT, just trying to figure out what was going on. She knew she had always struggled, but when she came in and got tested, again, it's just like the adult that you were talking about. It was a relief to know that all these years of struggling, there's a reason why, and that I'm not as dumb as I thought I was. So, no matter the age, I recommend to parents and caregivers get your child tested or yourself tested.
Yeah, and I think if an adult has to take one of those tests and is identified as dyslexic, and then they are able to get accommodations, that will often make the difference between a pass and a failure.
Yes.
So, and then what about some of the kids, maybe younger kids? Do you have any stories about a younger child who was identified and then went through testing? Or
There is one young lady, her name was Kristen, and because she was a July baby, that was the reason they thought that she had struggled in first grade and struggled in kindergarten and also struggled in second grade, and they wanted her to repeat second grade. But her parents were like, I know she's smart. They had her tested, got an official diagnosis, and realized that their child was dyslexic. And that just changed their world altogether, to know the reason why their child was struggling, and what they needed to do was just get that early intervention and start getting help from a trained professional. And then she went on and has been successful in her elementary years and now is successful in middle school years with accommodations.
so in that instance, they were fearful, or they were attributing, I should say, the struggles to a late birthday.
Yes.
There's also times, though, when the teachers will say, just wait, or I don't think it's dyslexia, or, we can't identify it till third grade. What would you tell parents about that, or teachers?
Our teachers, I would tell them, no, we can't identify as early as first grade. You can see the at risk features for those that are in kindergarten so that we know and can be on the lookout for that. But I still go back to do not delay in getting the testing. No matter what the school may say, do not wait till third grade to get your child tested, because that gap is just going to get wider and they're just going to get further behind. Go with that mama instinct. If you know something's wrong with your child, follow through.
Yeah, and I think there are so many stories of students and children that, you can't say, well, if we see the success stories, right? We see those that get identified and then get the correct education. You can't go back and say, well, what would have happened if they hadn't? But what we do know is that 50% of the population in the prisons. This is done by 2 studies, one of them, which is a study that I published, that 50% of the prison population, they're dyslexic. Now, it's not because dyslexics have this need to do things, wrong, commit crimes. It's because they sat in school, they never were identified, they felt terrible about themselves, they felt that they were stupid, and you just don't go back and back to be told, and make told you're stupid and feel like you're stupid. So they drop out, and they drop out in middle school, and they drop out in high school. So we don't want that pathway. We want the pathway of success, which is, as Rhonda said, that early identification and then the proper evidence-based instruction. So Rhonda, let's say I find out that my child is dyslexic.
Okay.
Can the Dyslexia Resource Center offer me any more services, or what do I do after I find out my child is dyslexic?
Absolutely, the DRC can offer more support and resources to you. One of the first resources would be our online therapy. And this is where we meet virtually with students that are dyslexic, working with them, teaching them. They meet 3 times a week for 1 hour. This is not just a 6-month plan. This could take up to a year or 2 to be able to get your child the therapy and the intervention that they need. So we have the online therapy that we can offer. We've just recently added in-person therapy in our Baton Rouge location. So we are excited to say that we are now offering in-person therapy for students in groups of 3 is the way that our therapy works, but we also can do individual therapy if a parent would like.
So Rhonda, help me. I'm a doctor. Therapy, I'm thinking chemotherapy. What
Oh,
is therapy?
okay. Therapy for a dyslexic is different than tutoring. So we're not necessarily tutoring your child, because when you need a tutor, you are working specifically on what happened in school that day, or you're working on history or science or math, trying to get them to understand what is going on in class. When I talk about dyslexia therapy, I'm talking about providing multisensory, systematic, direct, explicit instruction to these children for the way that they learn. We know that they need to have that multisensory presented to them in a very systematic way. And so that's what we call therapy. It is designed to meet the needs of your child. So we are not just starting in a program and going, hey, we have to go through all this. We are assessing, being diagnostic and prescriptive daily with our lesson plans to meet the needs of what your child would need.
And those needs would be, again, that those foundation and skills to learn how to read. And it might be they don't even know how to sound out the alphabet, or it could be something a little bit more complicated.
Yes, we're going to make sure that we cover the phonemic awareness, which is the manipulation of the sounds, being able to delete sounds, add sounds, understanding syllables. Also, with the alphabet, we think that because our children can sing the alphabet, that they know it. So we want to make sure that they not just singing it, but they are able to say the alphabet randomly, go through the alphabet, but then also learning dictionary skills. I know that's a dying thing, but being able to know alphabetical order, working on before and after skills for our children, but also within the lesson plan, we're working on their handwriting, because we know that a lot of times that our dyslexic children will struggle with handwriting. We start out working in cursive because we do find that it is much easier for them. But then after spending time in what we call those foundational skills, we're going to work on decoding, which is reading, breaking words apart, or encoding, which is spelling. And we know that's the area that they struggle with, and starting them again from simple and moving to complex. But then we also take the time to build upon their strengths, not just constantly working on their weaknesses, but building their knowledge of world and worldly knowledge, their background. Most of them come to us with a strong vocabulary, so we want to continue working and building that, but then building that comprehension. A lot of them, most come with that strength of critical reasoning, being able to understand. And so we want to build on those strengths also as we are for working on their weaknesses.
That's great. So, and a lot of this is on our website.
Yes, it is.
So we recommend that you check out our website. We have blogs, and then we obviously have the podcast. So I feel like we have a full array of ways to support you after you know that your child is dyslexic.
We also have, Dr. Cassidy, want to make sure we mention that if the therapy is not work into your schedule, we do have the Louisiana Key Academy schools that are available to our parents in different areas throughout the state, where that is a school that is for dyslexic children. So our teachers are trained working with our children in the way that they need to be taught. Dr. Cassidy, this is such a great way to start off this podcast. What can our viewers expect to learn by sticking around and subscribing?
Well, first, let me say, I'm a doctor, so I have one perspective, right? Rhonda is an educator, so she has another. And that's what's great. That's what you want. We want to give you perspectives. And I think what you'll see henceforth is a perspective from the medical aspect and the science, but you're also going to get someone like Rhonda, who is has a lot of initials behind her name, and she trains teachers and oversees that therapy that she described. We'll have parents that have problems or concerns or thoughts like you have had possibly, to sort of go through that route and what they learned on their journey and what worked for them and what didn't. And then we mentioned the Louisiana Key Academy. We'll have some of the staff from Louisiana Key Academy talk about how the school's structured, what's important. We'll talk about testing. We really just want to cover all the aspects of dyslexia because it is complicated. There is a lot. And again, hear it from different perspectives, different voices, so that you will find at least one or more that you can relate to. Our next podcast is going to be specifically taking a deeper dive because we're trying to give you the framework, then go deep, and then go out to all the different aspects of dyslexia.
And so is there a way that our audience can give us some feedback or suggest some topics for some of our podcasts?
Yes, you can leave reviews on the podcast. That'd be great. You know, you didn't like Rhonda. No, just kidding. Laura talked too much. I get it. You can subscribe to our YouTube. You can go on the website and leave comments or send emails if you'd rather go that route. So there are plenty of ways for you to interact with us, and we want you to do that so we can take your feedback and make this better. This experience is for you. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope this has been helpful for you. We've given you the resources available, so until you get to the next podcast, that you can engage with us. Our plan is to take your feedback, make this helpful for you, and really give you an opportunity to meet with experts in the field of dyslexia, whether it's Dr. Sally and Bennett Shaywitz, whether it's Rhonda, whether it's Sarah that does testing, whether it's someone from Louisiana Key Academy. We just are really blessed here to have a long history, a lot of experience, and a real deep love and concern for dyslexic kids so that they can get identified, they can get educated, and they can reach their full potential. So thank you, and we look forward to seeing you next time.